We all know that Labor's energy policy is driven by its emissions obsession. As long as you are running the electricity system to reduce emissions rather than to produce affordable and reliable power, you're going to have a huge problem. Labor's net zero straitjacket and its impact on the power supply, it's driving up prices, it's hurting people's standard of living, it's basically destroying our remaining heavy industry.
2025 is a year of change. Cultural and political disruption is transforming our nation and the global order. The rebellion against the establishment has accelerated. Australia and the Western Alliance is now at a crossroads. Either the mainstream will continue its ascendancy or the elites will prevail. Hello, Tony, and g'day to all of our viewers and listeners. Great to be back. Today, Tony will be sharing his insights on the net zero turmoil, immigration policy, and the lack of preparedness of our defence forces. Tony, great to be back with you.
As always, Dan, thanks for having me.
All right, well, let's start with the issue of the day, which is net zero and the internal ruptions of the Liberal Party. We're told that they're going to come to a position potentially this week on net zero, whether they'll keep it, whether they'll drop it. I'm interested in, firstly, your assessment of the current political dynamics within the centre-right on this policy issue.
Look, it's a huge discussion, and I do think that the sooner this issue is resolved, the better. But I also think it's important that it be resolved the right way. And I just don't see any gain for the Liberal Party in essentially me-tooing Labor on climate and energy. We all know that Labor's energy policy is driven by its emissions obsession. As long as you are running the electricity system to reduce emissions rather than to produce affordable and reliable power, you're going to have a huge problem. And just at the moment, Labor's net zero straitjacket and its impact on the power supply, it's driving up prices, it's hurting people's standard of living, it's basically destroying our remaining heavy industry, and yet you can't credibly attack Labor's energy policy if you accept the net zero straitjacket, which is at the heart of it. So I think that the coalition has to dump net zero. I applaud the National Party for quickly coming to that position, and I think that if the coalition is to flourish, it is important that the Liberal Party essentially adopt the same position so it is a united team going forward. Now, as well as dumping net zero, they've also got to come up with a sane energy policy, and as we've discussed before, Dan, I think it's pretty obvious what that policy should be. First, no more coal-fired power stations to close without a reliable alternative. Second, get gas out of the ground at express speed, because we've got plenty of gas. We just aren't allowed to extract it. Third, no subsidies for new renewables, because if they really are cheap, they don't need subsidy. And fourth, we've got to end the nuclear ban. Not that I think that nuclear power is necessarily going to be with us anytime soon, but eventually it will. And that starts with getting rid of the legal ban.
Isn't the other thing as well that dump net zero, but also campaign on it? So my fear is that they'll dump it, but then they won't talk about it. And that would have been like you saying when you became leader, we're not doing a carbon tax, but I'm not going to talk about it until the election. That would also be, I would say, a disaster for the party and for the country.
Well, I agree with you, Dan. You can't have positions that you don't then go out and articulate and defend. One of the weird things about the previous term of Parliament was that Peter Dutton, to his great credit, resolved to repeal the nuclear ban and to have a program of nuclear power in Australia. Inevitably, he was assailed on the grounds of cost and safety. What I would have done, were I in that position, I would have been going to the Lucas Heights nuclear reactor every other day standing outside the gates with the cameras saying, look, this thing has been here for 60 odd years. There's never been an accident. It's within a few hundred metres of houses. There's never been any radiation. No one is walking around here turning green or mutating. The fact is, nuclear power is more than feasible in this country. We built the Lucas Heights reactor. Within about 5 years, we went from nothing to something. It's not impossible. This is one of the big problems with modern Australia, Dan. We think small. We reckon that doing anything other than what we're currently doing, and even that we want to scale back, we think that anything other than what we're currently doing is somehow beyond us. Well, we didn't get to be the world's richest per capita country within 100 years of the foundation of modern Australia by thinking small. We got to be rich, we got to be free, we got to be fair, because people had to go, and that's the spirit that we need again. So, yes, Dan, we need to have a strong and clear policy, which is a contrast to Labor's, a definite contrast to Labor's, and we've got to campaign on it every day between now and the next election, because if you are challenging the zeitgeist, if you are going up against the leftist mainstream media, against all these rent-seeking behemoth capitalists, you don't win by being meek. You only win by being bold.
But the other thing I want to get your opinion on is the broader architecture of this, which is the Paris Climate Agreement. And there are some who are saying, let's get out of it. That's my view. I don't think we should be in the Paris Climate Agreement because I think we should set our own policy. There are some, who might be considered, quote unquote, moderates who would say, well, if you ditch net zero, you are therefore in violation of the Paris Climate Agreement. Now, that's not true. If you read the Paris Climate Agreement, it doesn't say net zero. There's some reference to emissions need to be offset and so forth, but it strictly speaking doesn't talk about net zero. But that is an argument that's being made. The Paris Climate Agreement also explicitly allows nations to leave after 3 years of signing up. So you can, I think it might be Article 26, you can leave it and technically be compliant with it because it's allowed for in the treaty, which is another point that's not brought up. But anyway, I'm interested in your thoughts on Paris and net zero. What do you reckon about that nexus?
Well, look, I've heard some people within the coalition saying that we would be an international pariah if we left Paris. Well, the fact is Trump has left Paris twice now, and I don't see the United States as an international pariah. Sure, lots of people criticise the policies of the current administration, but you cannot say that a country that isn't in Paris or pulls out of Paris is somehow an international pariah. So let's scotch that furphy at the beginning. My understanding is that it's more than possible to dump net zero and not have to abrogate the Paris Agreement. First, nowhere is the term net zero used in the Paris Agreement. Second, the Paris Agreement is not mandatory, it's not binding anyway. And third, as you've just pointed out, Dan, my reading of the Paris Agreement is that it commits signatories to carbon neutrality sometime in the second half of this century. Well, carbon neutrality by 2099 is a lot different to net zero by 2050. I mean, net zero by 2050 is utterly impossible without a complete economic and social upheaval. Carbon neutrality by 2099, well, that might be doable. And frankly, we should not do anything to reduce emissions that costs jobs, that drives industries offshore, and which hurts families' standard of living.
Hi, thanks for watching. Did you know that 3/4 of you who are watching this podcast aren't currently subscribed to the IPA's YouTube channel? So do us a favour, hit subscribe so you don't miss any of the action. And while you're at it, head to ipa.org.au and follow the prompts to subscribe to the IPA's website, so that way you'll find all of our research and analysis. Now, back to the chat.
Well, let's go to the second, I think, big policy issue, which is immigration. And I think after the Liberal Party resolves its position on net zero, they're going to have a position on immigration, now clearly the intake has been unprecedented post-COVID. It's not the only cause, but it's one of the main causes of housing prices going up, of congestion, of the use of our social services and so forth. Now, at the last election, the coalition did take a policy to reduce migration, but I think it was only 20 or 25% cut. And
It was a token cut.
And it was unclear as to what component of the migration system that applied, plus they didn't actually campaign on it either. So I'm interested in your assessment of the current immigration intake and where you think the coalition needs to be heading on that policy.
Well, Dan, my position for some years now has been that immigration does need to be cut quite substantially, ideally to about the average of the Howard era, which was 100,000 a year. In the decade after John Howard, it ran at about 200,000 a year on average. Since the pandemic, it's been running at close to 500,000 a year, absolutely unprecedented levels. It's scaled back a little, I think, in the last 12 months or so, but it's still running at close to 100,000 a quarter, which is miles too high because, as we should have worked out by now, immigration at these levels, it puts downward pressure on wages, it puts upward pressure on housing costs, it puts serious strain on social and physical infrastructure. And if you haven't got the houses for people to live in, you shouldn't be bringing people in vast numbers. The other problem with immigration at the moment is that we're quite undecided as to what purpose it's serving. Now, in the end, we should have migrants come into this country because it's good for Australia, not because it's beneficial for the migrants. I mean, I do think that everyone who comes to this country gains an immeasurable benefit. But in the end, the immigration program of Australia has got to be run for the benefit of existing Australian citizens. So, on balance, our migration system has got to add to our productivity. The pool of migrants have got to be net contributors rather than, I suppose, net beneficiaries from Australia. And it's far from clear that that's the case. It's more likely than not that the productivity of migrants on average at the moment is below that of the general population. The fact that our GDP overall is going up, but our GDP per person is going down at a time of mass immigration suggests that there's something fundamentally wrong. How do we fix it? Well, I think we've got to fix it by essentially removing the two big drivers. And the two biggest drivers are people coming to this country ostensibly to study, but in fact to work, supposedly for an education, but in fact for immigration. And this has become a racket. Yes, it's providing a funding model for various educational institutions from the universities down, but it's really a residency scheme, not a scholarship scheme, and so that's got to stop. I mean, quite apart from anything else, once you've got close to 50% of your student body foreign, and particularly people from non-English speaking countries, it's very hard to maintain the quality of the education. I mean, the stories, the anecdotal evidence is enormous that a lot of the so-called group assessment that's happening these days, you've got non-English speakers who are leaning on English speakers to get the work done and to get the marks. And in the end, this is debauching our academic standards apart from anything else. So we've got to, I think, be much firmer with the universities and put much lower ceilings on the number of overseas students they can have across the campus and in any particular course. Then we've got to say to business, look, you have a responsibility to train up locals and to pay locals properly. Just because you can't get particular skills at a particular price is no justification for bringing people in from overseas. We really have to stop this. No one should be coming in from overseas to do a job that might be done by an Australian with better training and higher pay. And I think that's the way forward, Dan.
Yeah, I think the other point that you raise importantly, which is similar to net zero, which is there are a lot of vested interests in the immigration program. And one of the political purposes of the Liberal Party is to be a voice of mainstream and regular Australians who don't have a voice in those institutions and are themselves not able to lobby for a better outcome. And this was one of the whole points of Menzies starting the Liberal Party. So taking a very low immigration policy will not only be good for the country and our society, but it's also one of the purposes of the Liberal Party is to break that sort of sectional interest nexus that exists pushing this policy. So I think it's incredibly important institutionally for the Liberal Party to be doing that.
I think that is important. The other point that I probably should make is that we do have to be concerned for social cohesion. And it's impossible not to notice a significant presence of what appear to be relatively recent migrants from the Middle East in a lot of these pro-Hamas protests that we've had over the last couple of years. We do need to discriminate on the basis not of race or religion, but of values. And that is implicit in the citizenship oath, which every new Australian is supposed to take. I mean, let's remember the words, "From this time forward, under God, I pledge my allegiance to Australia and its people, whose democratic beliefs I share, whose rights and liberties I respect, and whose laws I will uphold and obey." And Dan, the people administering the oath have got to take it seriously. The people taking the oath have got to mean it. And in the end, we all have to live it. And honestly, any Australian who isn't prepared to accept religious freedom, who isn't prepared to accept the equal rights of minorities to a peaceful existence in this country, well, they aren't being true to the values of the citizenship oath, apart from anything else. And let's never forget that every migrant since the convict era has chosen Australia. I mean, there's no one who doesn't come other than as a volunteer. And they've chosen Australia, presumably because they like what they see. So we do migrants no favours, just as we do ourselves no favours, if we have a migration program that over time changes the nature of the country, waters down our core Anglo-Celtic culture, erodes our fundamental Judeo-Christian ethos. And I just think we have to get serious about what we say to migrants, that sure, we're very happy to have you. You are a key component of our, I suppose, national existence, yet you do have to join Team Australia, every single one of them. You aren't just living in Hotel Australia. You've got to join Team Australia, and that's got to be a wholehearted embrace, not a selective one.
Well, the other thing we need to get serious about is our defence capabilities and our capacity to defend ourselves should we need it. And recently at a Remembrance Day service, the outgoing president of the RSL Association made comments to that effect in the presence of our Prime Minister. And I thought his comments were, I think, important comments on that day. And I think he has every right to make that comments given his position in our community and our society. But clearly we are falling behind in our capacity to defend ourselves. And what's your assessment of where we currently are following the Albanese-Trump meeting a couple of weeks ago?
Well, Greg Mellick, the outgoing RSL president, I know quite well. We served together on the board of the Australian War Memorial for several years. He's a really impressive person. I think he served for 30-odd years in the reserves, rose to the rank of Major General. He's also a highly respected, very senior Queen's Counsel, or King's Counsel, as they now are. So I think he needs to be listened to with a great deal of of attention. What he said on Remembrance Day was, it's all very well honouring the dead, but we have to try to ensure that we do not let our weakness provoke another war and generate more dead. This is a point that Andrew Hastie frequently made when he was the Coalition's Shadow Defence Minister. Weakness is provocative. And I have to say that we are economically stagnant, we are societally fragmented, we are militarily weak, we are spiritually poor at this time, and all of these things need to be addressed. But by no means the least of our problems is our immediate military weakness. As the Israelis have always known, and as the Ukrainians have found out in recent years, you never know when you might have an existential military threat, and when that threat comes, you resist it with what you've got, not with what you want, not with what you might have in a year or a decade's time. You resist it with what you've got. And I think that it's critical for the government to undertake an urgent audit of exactly what our country needs across the board, not just in terms of armaments, but across the board in things like industrial capacity, storage capacity for things like fuel and supplies, because if, for argument's sake, there is some aggression across the Taiwan Strait, which I think is more probable than possible at some point in the next few years, all international trade will be massively disrupted, and we can't count on getting supplies from overseas in that eventuality. We learned during the pandemic that in extremis it's every country for itself. So we have to have a serious national audit of what we are currently lacking, what we reasonably need to maintain ordinary life in this country and to keep the country as safe as possible in all reasonably foreseeable contingencies. It's just not happening. Even the recommendations of the government's current Defence Strategic Review are unacted upon. We have no serious missile defences, for instance. We don't have adequate supplies of fuel on shore. We are currently mothballing ships and equipment as opposed to boosting their numbers. So, frankly, it's a pretty dire situation, and I think that retired Major General Greg Mellick's warning was timely and necessary, and it should be heeded.
What do you think is behind the government's reluctance to do this? Is it budgetary constraints? Is it that it's not a priority? Is it that they have somewhat of a maybe naive view of global affairs? It's hard to understand what exactly are is it because they think they'll be giving in political ground to the coalition if they do this? I don't really fully understand why they won't do some things. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I think it's a combination of factors. I suppose at heart, there are very few people at senior levels of the current government who went into politics to boost the armed forces. I mean, they went into politics, amongst other things, to make the welfare system more generous, to expand minority rights, to combat capitalism, to deprecate the Anglo-Celtic Judeo-Christian core heritage of the country. That's what's motivated your average leftist activist who is now on the benches of the Labor Party in Parliament. And I think many of them, as I guess former student activists, would have looked at communist China relatively benignly and would have looked at capitalist America relatively critically, which helps to explain why they seem to be much more frequent visitors to Beijing and much more comfortable visitors in Beijing than they are in Washington.
All right, Tony, well, we'll leave it there for today. Thanks for your time and looking forward to catching up in about a fortnight.
Me too, Dan.
This is a production of the Centre for the Australian Way of Life at the Institute of Public Affairs. To find out more, visit australia.ipa.org.au.